So, brothers and sisters, firstly, it's always a pleasure to be here with you, and I want to once again encourage you in your faith. In this time more than ever, not only is it a time that is, in some sense, a beautiful time to be a Catholic, in the sense that the truth of the faith, in some sense, is being forced out into the light. That is to say, what we believe and why we believe it, which becomes all the more clear when it's most challenged. In a political season, that's not going to be the subject matter of tonight's reflection, but in a political season, I want to say that more than ever in this time, we must stand on the side of truth, goodness. We must pray for the culture of life to triumph and for an end to the culture of death. So there'll be more to say about that, but I also understand that the truth is that our world is saturated with a watering down of the truth, a way to kind of make it more palatable, to take off the edges, to make it something that is easy to go along with. And in fact, find sometimes that you're joined with a lot of people and in a group doing and thinking the same things. And yet we find that though sometimes that path might be easy, you find that it leads into confusion and the desert. As one political philosopher who turned atheist said, the whole of the Christian religion is awesome except for Jesus. Let's just take Jesus out of the picture and keep the ethos, the ideas, the morals, etc. This is something that we cannot do. And so I want to say now more than ever, you being those in sort of like, as it were, Aesop's fables or stories that have built inside them a moral, a truth. I also would stress then that this particular parable, but many others besides, and in fact so much of what Jesus says, would seem to confirm what the prophet Isaiah himself suggested in our first reading. What was the theme here of Isaiah's exhortation? Taken from the 55th chapter, he says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so high are my ways above your ways, and my thoughts above your thoughts." Now, if you were to hear your brother or your sister or your friend say that to you, that probably wouldn't go over so well, would it? But that it comes from the God who is, after all, the creator of the cosmos, the one who holds into being everything that is in existence, the one who generously does that, doesn't have to by necessity, but does so, affording all of us our own act of existence as an act of love. God plus the world is not bigger than God, paradoxically, meaning he somehow is affording to creation, all of us, you and I, you and me, the gift in these moments of existence. That he sustains it, makes a promise to it, that you have been willed out of nothingness and brought into existence means that you are wanted by him, that you are unique in every aspect of yourself, and that yours is a part that is sacred and solemn and unique in the story of salvation. By the way, God is both inside the world, he's immanent, he's somehow inside everything that we see, breathe. In him we breathe and move and have our being, as St. Paul says. But he's not coincident with nature. He's not simply nature. He's not inside it so as to say we can worship nature and be worshiping God at one and the same time, because he is likewise totally transcendent. He's not just other than it. He is, as St. Anselm puts it, the other. He's both transcendent and inside it, immanent. C.S. Lewis remarks that apart from revelation, the revelation in Jesus Christ, that pantheism, nature worship, is a fairly manly alternative to Christianity. And one can see why that might be the case. But in the meanwhile, ours is a God who has put it all into being and into motion. That's number one. Number two, in these words, he doesn't mean to establish himself as some dark archon, some archon above, disinterested in the world. He's not up there as a dictator. Things are not simply good and right because he says so. He's built into creation something that you and I can understand and see it to be good, even apart from our encounter with God and our belief in him. That is why it's possible for atheists and those who have rejected God to still live morally. They live in accord with the kind of law that's written in their nature, in accord with those things that comport with their goodness. I would also say that there's something about the revelation in God that opens all this up, not just into natural fulfillment, but into the gift of our destiny, which is divine fulfillment, being one with God and being like him and seeing him as he is. A little heavy, I realize, for 6:15 on a Sunday evening, but this is important, and it's worth getting your heads in the clouds for a moment and to think and to contemplate on. What the Lord means to say here is this: look, trust me. You're not going to understand the tides and the currents, the difficulties, all the things around you that seem to not make sense, most especially when suffering's involved, even in the midst of the worst kind of suffering, needless loss, injury and insult, the murderous impulses of prejudice, racism, fear among men and women, warfare, the estrangement between men and women, abuse, addiction. You all are all old enough to have touched those things. And if it's not you directly, it's someone you know. That these wounds run deep and makes it difficult, to be sure, for us, a challenge we're confronted with, to trust in the God who tells us over and over again to be not afraid. But we find that in our perseverance, in fact, he does come back to us. He does make good on his promise. And that's not just pious drivel. It bears itself out to be true, both in your experience as a Christian. And if it's not you in the moment, it's someone you know who can help you along the way. Most prominently, this gift of trust, knowing that, in fact, God, having that perspective that is beyond anything we can imagine. Looking down from above, by the way, God knowing everything always, already, and all at once, right? That's how God knows things. That he is all-powerful, all-knowing. By the way, so given in his commitment to creation that he allows it to go awry in the use of our freedom. Though he holds our freedom into existence and empowers it, he doesn't direct that freedom. That's our responsibility. And all the while, he's there nudging us in the right directions if we just have ears to hear and eyes to see. And so here we are with a story, a parable that perhaps underscores something that I certainly have experienced, and I dare say you probably have too. Here you are working your tail off. You've been hired. You've worked the whole day long. And perhaps there's some other person that comes along, or perhaps they're the entire time. And they're lazy. Freeloading, as it were. That you see your ethic is different. That you've put in a hard day's work. But that doesn't count in the end, at the end of the day, when you go to cash your paycheck. And there is a kind of injustice there, a kind of aggravation. What is justice, after all, right? Justice means, it's a cardinal virtue. It's the chief governing virtue of the social contracts, the society among men and women. It somehow undergirds what it is to live in harmony with each other. That I give you a couple bucks, and in exchange, I get a loaf of bread. An eye for an eye. That if you are a criminal, yours and your actions are worthy of the merit. That if you do the crime, you pay the time. More than this, there is a recognition of heroism when someone is super abundantly generous, perhaps even having given their life when they did not have to, were not required to, but nonetheless did so for his friends or her friends. That is worthy of honor, and that the virtue of justice is inscribed in the human heart so radically, so woven into it that you see it in little children almost right away. You know, the generous sort of fairy tale world, or the cops and robbers, that, you know, however that plays out in a little boy's play world and a little girl's play world, and they sort of intersect and are intertwined all the while. All of a sudden you start hearing children say things like this: "That's not fair. You cheated." Right? Now, you might not be yelling that out loud like that little boy on the playground, but you still say that in your mind and your heart. You see that, and your heart cries out for justice. By the way, in its most poignant form, this is what we call anger. It's the reaction, passion of the soul that has for its goal to level the playing fields, to hurt someone the way they've hurt you. Even the bet, right? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You kill someone innocent, I'll kill you back. There's something inside, we can all resonate with that, however non-homicidal we might be, but there's something inside us that says we understand that. It's inscribed in our nature and in our heart. We do need to be guided along the way, to be sure, but it's something that even apart from strict and good guidance, it's something that manifests itself just in human nature itself. So one understands the reaction of the workers here, to make a long story short. But here is the difference, and this is the crucial point. It is clearly the case that the laborers are us. We are the laborers that have been sought out by a landowner. That he has asked us to work in his field. That in fact he's even made promises to us. That in the course of our lives and in the measure that we're dedicated to this work, we will receive a reward even. But in the course of our labor, we realize that it's something much bigger than that, isn't it? There's more at stake here. It's not just about me and my benefit. If you're a Christian and in the truest sense, you realize that it's not just you and it's not about you, in fact. That what's actually given is something that's already been bought and is now afforded to you gratuitously and with freedom. That Jesus Christ became sin for us, that he bore our sins, has ransomed us, and achieved victory on the cross, and even defeated death itself. And that all of those things were, to be sure, a costly act. That this was not just a man, this was the God-man, the eternal Son of God, the Logos, who was with God at the beginning, who was God, who became flesh, walked among us yet again as he did in the beginning in the garden, reestablished his relationship with us. And though we had forfeit our relationship to God with the original sin, we being the spiritual heirs of that terrible, terrible moment, that fall from grace that affected and shook the foundations of the world and set into motion the dramatic and bloody register that is human history, that even touches us now, that all of that came to a stop, its power diminished and emptied. And this is what it looked like. It was a cross, and not just a cross, there is a corpus on the cross. It is a broken body. He is the only one who did not owe the world anything, who was just, who never sinned, and yet gave everything he was. And more than this, he doesn't just afford us redemption and ransom. He doesn't just pay our debt. He elevates us and establishes us by virtue of a grace he affords us as sons and daughters of a God who reveals himself as love. What is promised to us is given to each and every in full measure and overflowing. And that, as St. Paul says, though I want to depart this world, I realize I'm here for a reason, not just for me, but to bring others with me. To realize that, yes, it's going to be a hard road at times. Yes, you're going to feel unappreciated. Yes, people are not going to recognize the heroic things that you have done, both in your heart and in your actions. People do not know the pains that you have suffered in your life, what you have overcome and still have to overcome. People do not know your story. And yet all of that is seen by God. That in the order of grace, it's still something abundant and beautiful. This is what the saints realized. That what they were doing was not about them. It was about loving God, and in loving Him, realizing that we are all made for love, even as we have come from that love. My prayer for you is that this great gift of mercy and love will manifest in your life, that you would know it in a fresh way. To be sure, we are all in need of that. I also ask your prayers for us. We are about to ordain, or I should say, I'm not going to ordain, but we are about to receive a newly ordained chief shepherd of our diocese. He's a priest right now. He was a pastor before in Florida. His name is Father Stephen Parks, but properly speaking, he is Bishop-elect Stephen Parks. A good man, and is going to be a wonderful gift to our diocese. That's going to happen on Wednesday. I ask for your prayers for we, your priests, in this great endeavor, that we have the courage, the words to speak, to know this good news, to believe what we read, to preach what we believe, and to practice what we preach. That is the promise I made as a priest when I was ordained. But I think it's a poignant reminder of the call that lies before us all. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.